All right. Hey, everyone. Um, so I want to just start by noting a few things. I'm like really terrible at promotion, so I just am very bad at getting the word out. I like to teach, but I don't have like the wherewithal to tell people that I'm teaching places. So I want to tell folks about some classes that are upcoming as I begin to create more learning opportunities here. In the I'm in Southern California, and then also I'm doing some teaching up in Northern California in the coming months. So tonight and every Thursday night we have this Beit Midrash on the east side of LA, which is like a Beit Midrash is like kind of like a study hall, and we have a study hall and we learn some Talmud. So we're going to do that tonight, and we're going to learn tonight on a very famous chapter in the book in Tractate Sanhedrin that discusses Jewish belief and what's considered uh, essential belief and what isn't. So that's like that's what we'll be looking at tonight. Perek Chelik, it's called, and that's at Temple Beth Israel of Highland Park. Hosts us there, and would love to see anyone just show up. And it's all backgrounds. There are folks who show up who have learned a lot of Talmud, and folks who show up who are just figuring out what Talmud is. Then next week I am doing some teaching up in Northern California, and also running a Beit Midrash at Congregation Beth Shalom is hosting us up there. And I just sent out an email about it, and the email has LA on it, and I feel so bad because it's San Francisco, and that's the whole point is I'm doing some teaching up there. So Congregation Beth Shalom on February 8th, I'm teaching or leading again a Beit Midrash. I'm trying to do a lot of less just teaching because it's great to teach, but also creating learning spaces. And the Beit Midrash is really that's like, as far as I'm concerned, that is the heart of Judaism. Like, as far as I'm concerned, that's it. That's to be in a Beit Midrash is to be right in like Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. So that's I'm hoping to grow that space here in the great state of California and beyond. And so anyway, those are some events. And let me just give you because I'm so nervous about forgetting to tell anyone about these things. Let me give you just a link here where you can register for either of those things. So you could come tonight to the Beit Midrash, and you don't have to register either. You could just show up, but it's nice if you do, so we know you're coming. And then if you're up in San Francisco, that link has all of the kind of West Coast activities that are going on that we're running here in our new operations. And I'm such a disorganized person that I'm like barely getting the word out, but it's happening. It's happening. We're growing. So that's one promotion. And then the other promotion that I want to do is this feels a lot more fun and exciting to promote is other people's stuff. And this has been a week of books. In my family, in my life, in my community, in my colleague friend circle. And I think a lot of you know by now, but I finally got my copy of Rabbi Sharon Browse's book, The Amen Effect. And there was a book talk here in LA this week. And it's a really beautiful book with some really beautiful Torah in here, woven in, as you can see, like woven in. So beautifully. And so the IKAR obviously hosts this class, and IKAR is also just one of my communities, and so I'm just like thrilled as a community member to celebrate, thrilled as a colleague, thrilled as a everything to celebrate this book. And then I'm also I'm even more connected. I could hardly be more connected to a book that came out this week, but I happen to be because my brother released a book this week, Subculture Vulture, by my brother, and there's some Jewish content in here. It's actually it's an interesting. He's written memoir before, a book called Kasher and the Rye, and then this is a Subculture Vulture, and he's a member of the IKAR community. So I mention it for that reason, and also it has and also I would promote my brother's book no matter what, but it's a memoir in 6 sort of scenes. It's sort of about his life in very intense kind of subculture communities, and one of them is the Hasidic community that we kind of grew up half the time in, and so there's some Torah in here as well. So I recommend that to you all, and that is the promotion that I wanted to do. Amen effect and subculture vulture and some Torah. Yeah, just more Torah, more Torah. That's the whole point. Okay, so speaking of which, let's get to more Torah. Let's just say a blessing to kind of make a break between promotion and learning. Promotion's important too. That's what I have to learn. That's what I have to learn. So let's take a break here, and then we'll get into our learning for today, which I'm very excited about doing with you. So let's take a breath. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so thank God for Torah. Let me just start today by saying that what we're going to think about today is a topic that, boy, it is like a huge topic in the Jewish community. Sometimes I wonder, it's so big that I sometimes wonder what we even mean by it. It's one of those topics, and the topic is leadership. We're always talking about leadership in the Jewish community, and trying to cultivate leaders is important to have leaders. But it's a Jewish topic. I hear it all the time. It's like I was just talking to a guy who runs a really interesting organization called J Leaders, Jewish leaders. Everybody's seeking Jewish leaders, and asking really interesting questions about how leaders are made. Are leaders made? I mean, that's already like, to ask the question is quickly to ask is to problematize it, I think, in the Jewish tradition. And that's what I said when in this conversation with this founder who's running this really interesting organization. Again, I'll say J Leader, since I'm promoting today, why not? I said, that's the interesting thing, and he was well aware of this, is that our paradigmatic leader, our ultimate leader, the one that we look to as the model for leadership, Moshe, was uninterested in leadership, didn't want leader, famously hated being a leader, hated it. Like, I don't think it was just like a humble brag kind of thing, like he resisted at first, not politely, like he never enjoyed the job. That's a weird thing. And it's also certainly the thing that we admire most about him. You know what I mean? As a leader, like he had other virtues for which he was selected. And that's one of the things that we can think about as well, And again, it's such a massive topic. We're going to take a very textual look into it. I'm just going to speculate on leadership. But Moshe obviously he wasn't just like humble. He was the greatest prophet of all time. So he had talents that made him the right leader. He also had a background that made him the right leader. There were many things that made him the right leader. And that you might think, well, that's how you select a leader. That seems to be how God did it. I want that guy. That's the one. Okay. But I ask these questions because, and in such a broad way, because we should asked them in a broad way. Because this isn't just a Jewish concern, obviously. It is a Jewish concern. But these days, I think, there's so much political divisiveness. It's like toxic. I disengage. That's like my approach. That's like why I'm not a great leader in that way myself. But it's so toxic. But I think one thing we can all maybe agree on is that we are in desperate lack of good leadership, like just desperate lack of good leadership. And the people who would argue and say no, there are good leaders are usually like leaders themselves or aspiring leaders. Most of us are disappointed. Most of us feel like, like we people are here trying to survive, but our leaders cannot be who knows? We hope that we can trust them. We hope that we can trust them. And that's not this moment. It's sort of like it's a sort of an eternal truth that there's something suspect about political leadership, and that's a lot of what the rest of the Tanakh is doing. The books of Samuel and Kings are just and Judges. Gosh, I can't forget Judges. Are just showing you again and again how unstable and untrustworthy human leadership, human power can be. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at the Torah, because I want to frame all of that, or I want to not. I have framed, now I want to like zoom in and look at those issues through the lens of one very particular moment in the revelation at Mount Sinai, because that, after all, that's the topic of the week. Like, why am I talking about Moshe? I should be talking about God, because it's the Ten Commandments. It's the revelation at Mount Sinai. It's like this is the great moment where God reveals on Mount Sinai and reveals law. And so we could talk about law, we could talk about Ten Commandments. But before that happens, um, and here I'm going to give you a source sheet, and then we'll start looking at. Before that happens, God says something to Moshe, and is a kind of preparation. You know, like, I'm going to get ready, like, gather around this mountain, because I'm going to what? I'm going to do the thing that will become eventually recognized as the ultimate, the greatest moment, the defining moment in Jewish, I don't know, I don't even, it's so big, Jewish theology, Jewish peoplehood, Jewish formation, Jewish tradition, the revelation at Mount Sinai. And you would think, it's so big. Like, I'm trying to say what it represents. I can't even say it's like that big. So what does God say that God is doing it for? Why is God coming down on a mountain to, and you can answer the question in your head. Why would God come down on the mountain after God has already liberated the people from Egypt? There's like the parting of the Red Sea, like a lot of big stuff happened. Why would God now need to come down on the mountain and give this set of, not all the laws, but 10 laws, to show that God is the lawgiver? Why? Okay. And the answer, we could have that class, just like, why would that be? But God actually gives an answer in the chapter before. This is chapter 19 of Exodus. God gives an answer, and here comes your source sheet. Okay, I've been hiding the ball from you. Here comes your source sheet. Okay, and the answer is, it's kind of crazy, actually. It's kind of crazy. And Hashem said to me, let me just take you into the scene for a moment. I'm going to put this in English too. Okay. Okay, here we go. It's chapter 19, and on the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from land of Egypt. So 3 months later, they entered the wilderness of Sinai, and they'd been traveling around, and they're encamped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and God suddenly says, now you've seen everything I've done. Famous lines here, how I bore you on eagle's wings, and you'll become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Something is about to happen, but what is it? And Moshe goes, and this is the line. This is the verse 9 is the line here. We're going to go back to our source sheet. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God said to Moses, Hine anochi ba elecha be'av he'anan. I'm going to come to you in a thick cloud, ba'avur yishma ha'am b'dabri imach, so that the people will hear when I speak with you, v'gam b'cha ya'aminu le'olam, and so they will trust you ever after. And I actually I already don't like the translation, because there's a gam here, and also they will trust you forever after. Or maybe it's, and they will also trust you. So I feel like there's a nuance in there, like maybe it's they will trust me and you. I'm not sure. But this is the part, you can see the way that they translated it before. It's like it didn't even, oh, I've already now ruined it. Okay. Let me translate that again. And they will also trust you forever after. Okay. Okay. So this is really the question that I want to ask is what like this is quite an interesting statement of intent, that I'm going to come down on the mountain in this cloud, I'm going to speak to you, and then when I speak to you, the people will trust you. They will trust you after that. That's the only reason given for the great display at Mount Sinai. Okay. Now, that's an interesting reason. So I just want to talk about that for a while. And but really, I have a question here, which is, why is Moshe not trusted? And what is it about the revelation at Mount Sinai that will prove it? I mean, that actually, in some ways, is the less interesting question. I guess God is going to talk to Moshe in front of all the people, and that will prove something. Now, this is all a little odd, because Moshe's just led the people out of Egypt and announced all of the plagues, freed the people in God's name. So don't they already trust Moshe? Okay, so let's just start. I just want to start there. And I asked this question to myself, and then all of a sudden I started going backwards and thinking about this issue of whether or not the people trust Moshe. It turns out to be it's a theme that we can trace through the early chapters of Exodus. The people's trust in Moshe. So I want to just like bring us to this moment here, standing just about to receive the revelation at Sinai, and think for a moment about why it is that trust in Moshe would be the missing piece, the reason for the revelation. The reason for the revelation is so that the people will trust in Moshe. So let me stop there. I'm happy to keep going and like tracing it backwards. But if anyone has any thoughts on that basic question, I'd like to open the floor. Leah Matsui.
Moshe is an asylum seeker. He's a murderer. He's probably not completely fluent in the language. And he's an outsider that was brought into the group through the goodness of, today's guy, Yitro's heart. So he's can be looked on with suspicion. He's also a little bit emotionally distant, I think, to his family.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's the perfect place to start. Moshe's background, Moshe's history. That's right. It isn't just this moment, this pre-revelation moment, this post-Exodus moment. Moshe has always struggled with this, and understandably so, because of the position that Leah places him in. He's a kind of an outsider from the start, a kind of like doesn't belong in either place. And that manifests when he first goes out to see his people, to see his brothers, the Torah says, and he sees that they're in subjugation, and the first thing he does is he kills a taskmaster, because he has the power to do so and get away with it. Now that's a weird thing. That's a weird anyway, but so Moshe's like an unpredictable character in some ways, that in itself. But I don't want to make too much of that. The point that I want to make that I think fits so well with Leah's framing is that the next day he goes and he finds two Hebrews and they're fighting, and he tries to settle that dispute. Hey, and they say, "What are you're going to kill us? Like you killed the guy yesterday, you killer?" They don't trust him. So the language of trust is not there. We'll soon see where the language of trusting Moshe comes from. But yeah, Moshe is the people don't welcome Moshe like, oh, thank you, prophet, great, oh, great redeemer, you have arrived. It's like from the start, it's like, wait, what are you doing? We don't know you. You live in Pharaoh's house. We don't trust you. Okay, so that's it. Like that's a good first pass here. And and um and because of that, I want to also use Leah's comments as a way of taking us backwards. Let's start to feel this in the text. Let's start to feel the question of whether or not they believe Moshe in the text. And Leah gave us some narrative background, but now let's actually look. The word is there. The word is in the text. And we're going to go now to the like early on when Moshe has, by the way, this is a nice thread that we can trace here. Moshe realize from what we've just been saying, Moshe realizes that the matter is known. Achen noda davar. And so he flees because Pharaoh now hears about it and realizes Moshe's killing off, taskmasters and is, betraying the palace. And so Moshe has to flee, and Moshe flees, and Moshe goes into the desert and starts a whole new life as a shepherd in Midian. Again, Moshe didn't want to be a leader. Moshe wanted to be a shepherd in Midian, a shepherd, which is a leader, and there's an irony there, right? So, but Moshe gets there, and all of a sudden one day he's shepherding in the pastures, and he comes upon a burning bush, right? And then it's like everything begins. But God's like, ta-da, I'm here, I'm going to save the people, you're the one, all this stuff. And that's the whole point. Moshe, in a different Parsha, we would spend more time in Parshat Shmot, we would spend more time really like working through there are at least three moments of demurral, the deferral, the rejection of leadership. But this is the first one. This is the first after God's finished delivering the greatest news anyone could have ever received. This is what Moshe says. Vayan Moshe vayomer. Moshe answered and said, "Vehen lo yaminu li." This is what if. But in the Hebrew, it's just, they're not going to believe me. Vehen lo yaminu le. Here's that word again. They're not going to believe me. Velo yishmu b'koli. And they will not listen to my voice. Ki yomru, and they will say, and now this maybe is the first clue, Ki yomru lo nirech alecha Hashem. They'll say, God did not appear to you. Right? Now, this is really important because this is true. This is the first thing that you would say to someone who said they had a prophecy, I mean, I'll just tell you, I had a prophecy yesterday. God Almighty spoke to me, and I'm actually the leader of the Jewish people now. So lucky you. We're going to follow me from now on, Like, if I came to you and I said that, like first thing you would think, forget about whether or not I'm fit to be the leader. First thing you would think is like, I don't believe that's nonsense, And it's not like, oh, but it was a different time and they were the prophets. It's like, that's the first thing Moshe worries about. They're not going to believe that God was talking to me. Come on. Okay. So we're right. Like good. Now we're right in the thick of it. And maybe it is simply a matter of, and we can just feel the importance of that because it's so real to us. It's like we hear these stories of religions being, and the people debate and like, was the Mormon revelation real and was the Jewish revelation, and there are these moments of revelation. And how do you know that happened, especially if it only happened to one dude, right? That's part of the problem. Okay, now maybe we're arriving somewhere. At this moment, it's only happened to how are they going to believe it? And let me just give you the answer because maybe it helps, and then we'll turn back to the line of interpreters here. And God then, this is the funny, so Vayomer elav Hashem, and God says to him, Ma ze biyadcha? Ma ze biyadecha? What's in your hand? Vayomer mateh. And he said, a rod. Cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground. It became a snake, and Moshe recoiled from it. And that is Leman Yaminu Ki Nira Elecha Hashem Elokei Avotam Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov. That's so that they will believe you. And I have to say, like, and then there's more. There are more tricks. There's like, put your hand into your bosom, and it comes out, and it's all scaly. Now, this one's the funniest one, with the one where it's like, put your hand into, and then it comes out. This is like exactly the kind of trick that my father, Zichrono Livracha, used to do with me. It's like the kind of like, so like there's these like party tricks, and that's like it was a weird first answer. I mean, in one way, it makes sense. Moshe is saying, well, how are they going to know? Well, you can perform magic, but that, like, okay. And the last thing I want to say before we return to our group here is to say, well, I'm laughing a little bit about performing magic, but isn't ultimately that just a small version of the main reason that they should believe in Moshe now, which is that Moshe summoned 10 plagues. That's it. Don't you believe that if someone could say, like, there's going to be hail tomorrow, and that's one thing. If there's someone that could say there's going to be frogs tomorrow, and there's frogs, I mean, like, there's plenty of reason to believe Moshe now. Okay, good. Now I think, like, that brief interlude takes us fully into the conversation. So now let's turn back and hear what people think about this problem of belief in Moshe. So let's turn to Matt Silverstein.
I think possibly the only thing I've seen in the Torah that I did get taught was the idea that Genesis is introduction, that Genesis is presenting me the things. And I think this notion of trust and experience is something we see developing through Genesis. So Adam and Eve have direct experience with God right there. And then Abraham talks to God and gets a revelation, but it's more separate. And then finally we end with Joseph, who doesn't even talk with God. And I think that's prepping us as the reader to start to walk into that space of believing the story we're told about talking to God. So now we have Moses kind of recapitulating that for us and actually saying the problem out loud.
Yeah.
Why are they going to trust? Why am I going to trust?
Right.
And so I think it's to get us to the point. I think all of that other stuff is to get us to the point so that when we now get this other stuff, we're paying attention. We're listening and we're hearing what's in front of us.
Okay, good. Okay, so two things there.
I have to make it clear. I mean us. I don't mean them. I mean those of us sitting here now, those of us sitting 2,000 years ago reading the text.
Meaning this scene is for us?
Yes, this scene is for us to start to understand trusting and what does that mean and how do we get there?
That's really interesting. Okay. I think I understand now. Matt is saying a lot of, as usual, very brilliant and complicated things. So let me see if I can process them for myself a little bit. This first of all, this framing that Matt gave is so interesting. Like it reminds me of, Matt's bringing us back to Genesis, where Adam and Eve were just like talking to God, in the garden. And then Abraham also, talks to God. Now we're in Exodus. Okay, Moshe's also talking to God, but it's not as clear and as simple. And there is a kind of progression that Matt is alluding to that, who else makes a lot of this progression is one of our esteemed faculty members at Hadar, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, one of the great theologians, Jewish theologians of our time. And he has this idea that a part of what Jewish history is the removal of God from history slowly, so that we as people are increasingly empowered. We take over. God's very present at first. In the Garden of Eden, God's just in charge and you don't have to do anything. then in the book of Genesis, God is still communicating. Because there is this question, if you're a believer, like, why doesn't God talk to people anymore? You know, if you're like following this as sort of our sacred history, why don't we have these moments? Is it all just a metaphor? But one way of answering it is God was more directly intervening. And Exodus, of course, is not far from that. God is still directly intervening, but because that's the whole point of the Exodus, God intervenes in history and releases the people. But it's different. God is not just, you know, sending angels down as God did to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, God is not just communicating with one family about their internal. God is like is using a human agent, a leader. Even Abraham, even Jacob, they didn't function as leaders in that way. They led a tribe, they led a movement, they started something, but to lead millions of people, that's a new thing that God is doing to you. And so it is a kind of a shift. There's a shift happening here. But Matt also adds, and I think this is an important, like this, I don't want to lose this point either, that means that it isn't just a shift in the narrative. It means that part of what happens if God is going to increasingly empower human beings or increasingly be removed from the picture is that the obviousness and the belief in God becomes in human contact with God, I would say especially, becomes more and more strained, so that by the time you get to Jeremiah, people aren't believing that he actually talked to God. And then by the time you get to me, if I told you I talked to God, you'd be like, get out of here. God doesn't talk to people anymore, right? Like, that's the way we feel, right? They're like, if someone emerged as a prophet right now, what would it take for you to believe them? I guess they could do miracles. You know, like they're in a way, it's like, yeah, I would need that actually. So, okay, good. So there's a lot, you can see there's a lot of just basic theological narrative dilemmas here that we're running into, and that we would run into even if we were dealing with this today. Okay. David Kurtz, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Rabbi?
Good. I haven't talked to you in a while.
You know, I've always looked at as at Sinai as the great handoff, going from the handoff of responsibility. In other words, here's your toolkit. If you want to survive humanity, here's the Ten Commandments. That's your starting place. But what I just want to say in response to what you were just saying, but getting back to the point I wanted to make is that God has to convince Moses that he's a leader. You know, Moses hasn't been a leader yet. You know, he's just basically taking commands, raise your arms, split the sea, do this. You know, I'm gonna harden Pharaoh's heart. He's not been a leader. Now he's gonna be a leader. So you're gonna go up to that mountain, and you know, everybody's kind of gone backwards. I'll go forward in a minute. You know, with and say that when Moses comes down the second time, now he's a leader. And he's actually in light in all those kinds of things. So I look at these moments as God has chosen him to be a leader. He obviously, not he, but God believes that Moses can be a leader. Now, Moses, you're going to believe you're going to be a leader. And
okay.
Plus, you're a leader, then you can convince the people that.
Okay, great. This is great. Okay, because here we are, like, you know, more than halfway through the hour, and we haven't actually arrived at the scene. We did, and then we took a step back and thought about just the whole dilemma of Moshe's leadership, ascent to leadership, believability, relationship to God. But David's right. There's something new happening here. This is like Parshat Yitro. As I said, it's a game changer. It certainly has a claim to being the most important Parsha in the Torah, because it is where the Torah is revealed, or God is revealed, or the foundation for the idea that the Torah comes from God. Because it's a little bit of a dilemma. It's like Moshe has like led these people out of Egypt, and he's like he's led a revolution. But now what? There's like a principle in revolutionary politics that like the leaders of the revolution shouldn't be the leaders of the government because it's a different energy. But actually Moshe's going to lead people into a time of, they're going to have laws, Moshe's going to be overseeing now a migrant people as they travel through the desert. Okay, so this is a different, what Moshe is going to have to start doing is entirely different. And so like that brings us into the revelation at Mount Sinai, and maybe start thinking about why it is, because remember, it isn't there. We're not just raising an abstract question of Moshe's believability. We are seeing the revelation at Mount Sinai as a response to, as an ensuring that Moshe will be believed by the people forever then after. And you know what? That worked. I mean, that sort of worked, at least like on some level. Moshe, at least as the conveyor of God's word, that worked. Whether Moshe was a good leader, or whether there were rebellions later, or Moshe has failures that prevent him from going into Israel, but in terms of the whole tradition kind of seeing itself as like, yeah, that was the guy who could communicate God's word. That's actually what Moshe's primarily known for, in fact. And that's remarkable because he liberated the people from Egypt. You would think that he would be known as the revolutionary, but he's actually known as the lawgiver. And that's where we get to the heart of the matter. So I thank David for that. I want to just give us some more text to work with as we think about that, because you can really see Moshe's ascent to a different kind of leadership happening in the Torah. And to note that, I want to take us one step back. So where have we been? Okay, let me just chart this. We have been dealing with Moshe's background, his sort of coming up in the world, and where that positions him, his ascent, his encounter with God at the burning bush, and his sort of like mission, and the worry that people are not going to believe. And then he goes, and we could go back and forth on like, what is his relationship with the people in Egypt? But I just want to note that there is a moment where we read that the people did believe in Moshe. And I just feel like as a textual guy, we're not just speculating, we're tracing a theme as it appears in the literature of the Torah. We must note that last week at the Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, when the waters split, the people famously, this is the moments before the song of the sea. We say this every day in our prayers. Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagdola. So this is like Moses held his arm out over the sea. God said to Moshe, hold your arm out over the sea. Moses held his arm out over the sea. The waters turned back. The Israelites marched through. I mean, it's just really, this is it. This is considered the great, forget about all the plagues. This is the great miracle of the Torah. And then Vayar Yisrael hayad hagdola, and when Israel saw the wondrous power Asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, that God had wielded against the Egyptians or in Egypt, Vayiru ha'am et Adonai, and the people feared the Eternal, or were in awe of the Eternal. Vayaminu b'Adonai, and they had trust in the Eternal. Uva Moshe avdo, and in his servant Moshe. V'yaminu b'Adonai uva Moshe avdo. Okay. So there they believed in God and in Moshe. And I think we can also start to ask the question, how much is this is I think Matt was also asking this question. How much is belief in Moshe tied up in belief in God? Like, to believe in Moshe is to believe in God. To believe in Moshe is to believe in the God that Moshe is saying that Moshe is speaking to. Right? Okay, so they believed in Moshe at a certain point. God said that. God said, perform these tricks, but then perform these plagues. and things get really big, and they leave, and they part the Red Sea. And there was a moment there. There was a moment when we all believed in Moshe. It's like, it's true. It's all true. Look at what Moshe could do. Look at what Moshe could do. It's unbelievable. And then there's something different now. That's chapter 14. 5 chapters later, God is saying, but I want people to believe in you forever. There's something now. I need people to, I don't know, have they lost belief in Moshe? Or is this a different kind of belief in Moshe? Okay, great. So let me call on Richard and then Noah.
So there's very different sort of Hebrew used in chapter 4, where he says, Lo Yaminu Li. And then there's, that the people will believe in you. And so in chapter 4, it's belief, I think, more in God, and that Moshe is delivering a message that God is going to be the savior. And I think, as you said, this is a question of really about belief in God. Later, it is belief in Moshe. That's sort of a different sense of belief. And if there is going to be a transfer to Moshe as God's kind of representative, that's almost belief in the Torah as the more sustainable model of going forward, where God will not be intervening in the day-to-day. And what we're left with is the more sustainable belief in the Torah and its ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Okay, good. So that's one of the things that we're starting to think about. I think Matt started us thinking about, and I think Richard is helping us think about, is like the transference of, not power, the transference of authority. Where does authority come from? And it's not really going to work to, maybe this is part of the dilemma of Genesis, to only just have God talking to people all the time, telling them what to do. And it's not even going to work to have God telling one person what to tell everyone else. That's also a problem, okay? And so we're slowly moving over to, Richard says, a kind of, well, what can we have that we could really trust forever? Maybe this is the pshat, the real meaning. What we could have is the Torah. If I can verify you as a legitimate agent of my message, and then they believe that, then I can give the Torah through you, and then we'll have something that's like firm, because whatever anyone says in the future, you can just, you can and will debate with the meaning of Judaism forever, and we're doing so today. But we all kind of agree that the Torah is an important part of it. You know what I mean? Like even secularists, like it's like, well, that's the ancient history of Judaism. It's like there's something about that that's like, yeah, well, that's, so the Torah has its own power, and maybe we're moving towards that power right now. Okay, I'm using every chance I get to bring in some more text, and this is a good opportunity because of what the problem that Richard frames for us. To insert, I want to insert right in the middle of Richard's thought there, like they had direct contact with God in the garden. That was what Matt was saying. They had less direct, but direct contact with God in Genesis. Then Moshe has direct contact with God in Exodus. Then we're going to move to towards the people all having laws that are known and agreed upon. But in the middle, and this to me feels like, oh, this is an important clue. What happens in the middle between V'yaminu ba'Hashemu v'Moshe avdo? They believed in God and Moses, God's prophet, and then now the need to believe in Moshe again. What happened in the middle? What is the first great event in Parshat Yitro? It is Moshe getting a visit from Yitro. That's why we call it Yitro, from Moshe's father-in-law, who comes to hear about all the wonders, to bring, Moshe had sent his wife and children home to bring them back and to come and hear about all the wonders. And then they celebrate and they're so happy to see each other and they have a great relationship. And that's really interesting. But we'll think about it another time. But what happens afterwards is that Yitro witnesses Moshe in the business of being the leader of the people. What he does is he sits all day while the people stand in line and he judges their cases one after another, one after another, one after another. And people come before Moshe and they say, our supreme leader, we believe in you because you're the leader. You brought us out in the, my cow was stolen last night, and I think that it was Yankel here, and Moshe has to, use prophecy. It all has to go through Moshe. And the famous advice that Yitro gives Moshe is, and by the way, I must say, there's a beautiful reflection on this moment in this book here. So like look for a beautiful reflection on Yitro's advice to Moshe. And this is the advice. Moshe next day sat as magistrate, really judge. I don't know why magistrate. As judge among the people. And while the people stood, so Moshe sat while they stood, but when from morning until evening, this is his leadership. But when Moshe's father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, why is this thing that you're doing? What is this thing you're doing to the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand about you from morning until evening? And Moshe said to his father-in-law, it's because the people have come to inquire of God. Now that's quite a phrase. Ki yavo elai ha'am lidrosh Elokim. The people come to me to seek God. Okay? So I'm the conduit, I'm the channel. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between one party and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God. And Moshe's father-in-law said to him, Lo tov hadavar asher ta'aseh. This is not good. Ne lo tov. Ho tov. This is not good what you're doing. You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well. For the task, ki kaved mimcha davar. The task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Okay. All right. So that's the scenario that Moshe is in just before we start talking about the revelation at Mount Sinai. Moshe's father-in-law has some advice, but guess who else has some advice? Is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who says, yeah, that's correct. You can't just sit, you can't be the vessel. I mean, it's dangerous. It's actually dangerous what Moshe's starting to do. Not only will it tire him out and the people out, but it deifies him. It gurufies him. It makes him the holy vessel, the holy channel for God's word. And that's very dangerous religion. That's like Pharaoh religion. Okay, so now I think the pieces are starting to come together. And let me just throw one more thing in, but before I turn back out to folks, which is this. When God says, we started here, that they had gone forth from the land of Egypt, and then God went up to the mountain, Moses went up to the mountain of God. What does God say? God says, you've seen what I did to you, the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings. And now you keep my covenant. You shall be to me mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. What does God mean by that? All of you, you will become, there will not be a priest, although there will be a priest, so it's like, I don't want to overstate this point, but it's like rhetorically, it's like, no, somehow this can't be invested in one person, and yet, the whole point of it is to prove that Moshe is believable. But I think Richard really is on to what is the point of it? Moshe is believable so that Moshe can become the vessel for the Torah, instead of being being the Torah itself. Moshe was setting out to be the manifestation of God's word on earth. That's dangerous. But for the Torah to be the manifestation of God's word on earth, well, that's our religion, So great. Okay, so let's see if we can hear from these last three folks before we close, from Noah, and then Allison, and then Jen.
Okay, perfect. You brought us verse 9. I'm bringing everyone verse 8. Vayaninu kol ha'am yachad, vayomru kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh, vayeshiv Moshe et divrei ha'am el Adonai. That the people said that we will do this, na'aseh. So they're saying they're going to do it. And I think that should be a close, but it definitely isn't, because at some point they also say nishma.
Right. Good. All right, good. Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That's like there's so much in what you're saying, though, that I won't like there's not enough time to work through it all, but that's really interesting. There are different places in the Torah where the people say nase, we will do, but there's a famous place later on where they say nase v'nishma, we will do and we'll understand in the doing. And maybe there's a transition there where the people need to like get to a place of so there's more in what Noah's saying than there's time to really understand, because I think that's really interesting if we could trace those verbs. And those verbs are important, things like hearing, because that's part of what Moshe has been worried about all along. Remember, let's go back to the first moment where Moshe met God, and he was worried they're not going to believe me and they're not going to listen to me, right? They're not gonna believe and they're not going to listen. And so there's something about like, them being willing to really comprehend something, but also at this moment that like this is too much of a tangent right now. So I want to investigate it in real time, but I can't. But I will just say that Noah is right to call us to this moment just before. Oh, they're going to look at this. They're going to listen to you, and actually, you know what? This gives you a sense, if you're intrigued by what Noah's saying. Follow this. They say we will do nase, but God says they will listen, and then they'll believe, right? So that's really. Noah's got some really, really kind of deep, intricate Torah there, where it's like they need to get to the place of nase v'nishma. We will do, but we will also listen, hear, process, understand, realize, believe. And for them to get to that, they need the revelation. Okay. So the Moshe Noah needs to teach a class of his own, because that's a really good series of connections to make. But we'll hold that for another time. Thank you. That's great. Allison.
Thank you for this class. So interesting as always. I have been reading a lot of Aviva Zornberg's work in this last year. And one of the things that I feel like I've really learned from her is I've always been attracted to kind of like the psychological reading of the Torah, like reading it as like kind of like a personal journey and that kind of framing. And what Aviva Zornberg has really taught me is how the Torah and these stories can be really used and understood as a way of teaching us like how to love and how to be like in loving relationship. And when you were just talking about like people believing Moses and like why was it not enough, like the Song of the Sea and the parting of the seas and all that stuff, it made me think about in a relationship, like the different phases that we go through and how there's like, when you're kind of like stuck in this narrow place of like wanting to meet someone, but you haven't yet. And you're like, oh, I'm so trapped. And then you meet someone and it's like, oh my God, this is a miracle. And it feels like kind of the parting of the seas, like this, wow moment.
Yeah.
But then after that, like every day is not wow. Every day is not God's going to come part the seas. And there becomes like something else that happens, ideally like based on like really deep listening, like patterns of relationship and kind of codes of conduct. And like what are our rules of engagement here? And how do I need to show up in the world to like let you be really loved? And
let me just cut you off just because of time, but I love what you're saying. Love what you're saying. I want to thread it a little bit, like I want to interweave it with what Richard was saying, because I think that there's something beautiful about that. And you're right, it's a very Zornberg kind of thought there, that like the people were in this rapture and there's a sort of psychic state of like all senses exhilarated and yes, I believe 100%. And have you ever been in that moment where you just in this moment, I believe everything is good, and I believe in God, and I believe everything is true, and life is. But that's the parting of the sea. That's not every day. And what the people will need here is some stability. Aviva Zornberg talks about this, talks about it with the Mishkan, talks about it with the Torah, some kind of like centering force that grounds you psychically, psychologically. There needs some relationship with a God that will be a yom, a daily relationship with a God. The Torah will give that to them in a way they can't have liberation every day. You wouldn't want it. What? You wouldn't want to be liberated every single day, because that would mean you would have to be an impression every single day. But it's those peak moments that you remember, but they're not enough, actually. And what's necessary is like, no, here, this person's offering you not just freedom, but some way of living, some daily way of living, some reasonable way to organize a society into the sort of minutia of every day. And that's really important as well. All right, so to track that with what Richard was saying earlier about like the move from the prophet revolutionary to the lawgiver, Moshe the lawgiver, that's like okay. Let's see if we can not sneeze in, achoo. One last thought from Jen.
Well, I mean, Allison's beautiful comment is very close to kind of where I was going. And that is like, I hear us talking about leadership and trust as being based in belief, but it's actually based in relationship, right? We can believe somebody is absolutely right about things, and we can even believe that they have a line to God, and still we won't want to follow them if they don't have a relationship with us, right? And God and Moses are learning that lesson at the same time. And I go back to that line of you cannot do it alone, which we often interpret as you need other people to be leaders with you. But that also can be interpreted as you can't do that if you're separate and alone. You have to have relationships with these people in order for them to want to follow you. And I think, God's learning exactly the same thing. I can't just speak through one person and not actually have any kind of means to have a relationship with people. I have to have some kind of means for that. And Torah is that. That is us having that relationship with God that we have to have in order to actually have trust.
I think I'll give Jen the last word. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for a really, really important exploration of this really critical issue in the Torah for theological reasons, for sort of people defining reasons, for like, and we continue to this narrative, not just the laws of the Torah, but the things that lead to the Torah, and the character that brought us the Torah. Like, we continue to reflect on this because we have such a hard time, finding people that we can trust. And so I bless us with leaders we can trust. Yeah. Wishing you all Shabbat Shalom.